This is Ernie Porter. This is my Juniper tree response story. Lily daydreamed about her vision of a perfect life all through childhood, and when she laid out in the grass and drifted away, she saw a nice cottage home with tall green grass, greener than you'd ever seen. A subtle, yet just right, white home with two giant windows to let in sunlight right in the front of the house. She saw the perfect family, enjoying the sunlight that warmed the front foyer area, and she always saw the same three perfect little boys playing with their pocket toys together in perfect rhythm. She felt serene, fulfilled and warm when she saw these visions that played in her head, and to her bright surprise, she found just this in her life in the future. She had a lovely husband of whom she was rather fond and began building her perfect family of five. The first two children were born 9 months after each other, as soon as humanly possible to produce. The thought of completing her vision of a perfect family made her skin tingle and her head spin with happiness. She was so extremely elated to bring these dreams to reality. Following the advice of her doctor, Lily took a pause between pregnancies to help her body acclimate and respond to her previous pregnancies, and so Lily did just that. Through the year, Lily's obsession with completing her perfect life became all she could think about, and she became more in love with the idea of her perfect family than her actual family themselves. As the days turned to months, her obsession deepened until it completely consumed her. Her year of waiting period passed, and before long, she was pregnant with her third and final child. The 9 months of pregnancy flew by like a passing jet. Lily had grown so obsessed with her third and final child that she had overlooked her already present children and the telling signs of the surprise to come. Through all the months of carrying the final piece to her perfect life, she failed to notice she was double in size compared to her last two pregnancies. On the fateful day that was supposed to complete the vision of her dream family, Lily gave birth to a third beautiful baby boy, but the family didn't stop at five. After Lily gave what she thought was her final pushes and gave birth to her third baby boy, the doctors realized she had been carrying not one, but two babies. As she received the news that she would need to push again, Lily's entire world seemed to crash around her. She could no longer feel her body straining to give life to another human. All she could feel was devastation. The room spun around as she gave birth to the unwanted alien of a child. When the pushing came to a stop and the doctors handed her her fourth child, she grimaced with disgust. The love and passion she felt for the first three children in her dream family were matched by the disgust and contempt she felt for the fourth child that ruined her vision of a perfect life. The child was disfigured from being malnourished and had arms of different lengths and red blotches of pigmentation all over his body. When the days passed and the time came for Lily to go home, she couldn't bring herself to bring the fourth child with her. When she held the child, she felt disgust and disdain. She couldn't even look at his disfiguration without thoughts of harming the child for ruining the perfect life she always envisioned. When she was released, she walked out of the hospital and immediately set him and his carrier down outside of the front door and never looked back. It wasn't 15 minutes before a hospital worker stumbled upon the abandoned child outside the front door, and her heart wrenched when she realized the reality set forth for this child. She called the local orphanage that their hospital worked with and set a pickup for the new resident. As the years passed, the child grew, and his troubles grew with him. He was given the name of Liam by his headmaster, but never felt like it quite fit. He never felt like the person he was referred to as, and it left his mind confused and weary. He was quite small compared to the rest of the children his age, and he was always an outcast. The other children referred to him as a freak and called him names like Long Arm Liam because of his different length arms. Not only was Liam an outcast from his age group, but he was also treated as a misfortune by the leaders of the orphanage. When prospective parents looking to adopt came to the orphanage, he was often screamed, "Get out of eyesight! We can't have a creature like you scaring these people away," and was shoved into a cupboard with his mouth bound to prevent him from making a single sound. Liam would press his face against the crack in the seam of the wood and longed to feel accepted like the others at the orphanage were. He watched his potential parents cast love, hopefulness, and acceptance onto his peers, and his body ached at the thought of never feeling loved. He thought to himself, if I could even feel an ounce of love for just a day, just to understand what it means to feel wanted, that would be enough. Liam was constantly filled with the feeling of never being enough and never being wanted, and he longed to feel in place and welcomed. As each day passed, his spirit broke further and further until there was nothing left to break down. Liam began to believe he was never to be worthy of being loved. He would look down at his arms and hated the fact that they weren't like everyone else's. He saw the hate and disgust when he looked into his own face and longed to be like his peers. He truly felt like the freak they called him and longed to be considered normal. One fateful day, when prospective parents were coming to see the orphanage, Liam was bound and shoved into his cupboard, but this time he was put in by a new staff member of the orphanage. The bound around Liam's mouth felt tighter than it ever had before, and he was shoved head first rather than feet first as he usually was. As he struggled to position himself in a correct manner, he fought for air that just wouldn't come. He gasped repeatedly and desperately, needing oxygen in his lungs, but he just couldn't obtain it. He squirmed and struggled as he saw his vision start to fade into a black tunnel. Beads of sweat glistened down his face as he faded faster and faster as he thought, "This is it. This is how I'm going to die." Liam felt his eyes fade completely to black, and the last thought he got across his mind was, "I just want to be loved and be normal." Before he knew it, his eyes were shutting for the final time. To Liam's shock, his pain had stopped. His vision was still black, but it was as if life around him had stopped. For the first time in his life, he felt comfort, at ease with no pain. He thought this was the afterlife, and he thrust his eyes open. When his vision regained, he saw the walls of a room he had never seen before. He looked down at himself and couldn't believe his eyes. Both of his arms were the same length. He leapt out of the bed and heard the call, "Liam, are you awake?" as he saw his own face in the mirror for the first time. It was as if he had been given a second chance. He saw a normal face before him, and for the first time in his life. It was at that moment that the door swung open and a woman standing before him said, "Good morning, honey. Breakfast is waiting for you downstairs," and kissed him on the head with a smile before shutting the door and leaving. When Liam's head swung back around, he looked at himself in the mirror again, and before him stood the face and body he had always known. His reflection looked back at him and whispered, "This is your second chance. This is your second chance at life. You'll never stand out or be unique, but you will always know how it feels to be loved." As Liam grew, he went through all the phases of his life and never forgot what his life could have been for him. He was never extraordinary. He never stood out. And he was never liked for his athleticism. He was never picked first for sports. But when he returned to his family, he was greeted with unconditional love every time, and he realized that those were the only things that mattered.